y'all. This is Dr. Amy with Life Conversations with Dr. Amy's podcast. Let's have a conversation, y'all. We're going to be talking about sex. Yes, we have our guest here, Miss Dr. Leanna Wolfe. She has a PhD in sexology. She's a sex researcher with her MA in anthropology. She's an author. We'll get in more into her book later on. She engaged in field research in Mexico, Africa, India, Papua New Guinea. She was a university professor from 1980 to 2018, teaching a professor of anthropology. And she launched her Wise Women Sex and Relationship Consulting in 2016 to the present. And Miss Leanna, Miss Dr. Wolfe, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Sure.
Thank you for joining.
So, the book that I just had published is called 177 Lovers and Counting: My Life as a Sex Researcher. And what led to the creation of this book was classes that I was teaching where I was having my students write their own sex histories. And most of them were simply addressing whether or not they'd yet experienced sexual intercourse and how it went. And that was basically their history. They didn't think about all the other many things that are part of sex. And what I decided to do was thinking, I really should do this assignment for myself. And as I looked at my own history, I realized that I'd been a sex researcher. I've been curious about all kinds of things related to sex before, when I was a very young person, and then as I was learning more things as becoming an adult, and then I just kept wanting to learn more and try various things. Most of them didn't stick as things I wanted to do for myself forever, but I wanted to try stuff. I was just interested in human potential and what humans have created. I was interested in how humans engage sexual energy and what they do with it and how they partner and who they partner with and all their beliefs about partnership and marriage, etc. So that's a little bit about me. I ended up in the course of releasing the book, which is published by an academic publisher, Rowman and Littlefield, and is actually an anthropology textbook with a wild title. I ended up deciding to do a solo show because I'd been studying solo theater. So I've been performing the show at theaters here where I live in Los Angeles, as well as at conferences, both for anthropologists and sex researchers, etc.
Awesome. So can you go a little bit about your teachings as a university professor?
Yeah. So I taught a class called Gender, Sex, and Culture, as well as all kinds of other anthropology classes. But in that class, I often covered research that I had done. Like one of the things that I did back in the late 90s was go to Kenya and then onwards to Tanzania and Uganda and East Africa to study polygamy, because I had been partnered with a man who got involved with another woman. And I wanted to understand how women in other parts of the world make sense of this and make family out of this. And it was really interesting stuff that I ended up talking to my students quite a bit about, and wrote an essay that got published in quite a few journals called Adding a Co-Wife. So that's one of the things I spent a lot of time talking about. I was also hired to study orgasm by a woman named Ava Cadell, who had a website called Loveology University, and she funded me to study orgasm. And that is something that I would talk to my students about as well.
Okay, so everybody, this is a mature adult conversation. Dr. Amy is on the black couch for this one. But I want to ask, when you did the study on orgasms, how can you describe that study?
Oh, sure. So one of the things that's pretty interesting in terms of how Americans have engaged orgasm has to do with what was going on in the 70s in second wave feminism, when the likes of Cher Hite were producing books, and she wrote a book called The Hite Report, which claimed that 70% of her respondents were not achieving orgasm through intercourse. And I got as a young woman, I was like wondering, is this really, so why would anyone even bother having intercourse if it was so ineffective? And how accurate was her data? And the truth is she sent out her survey to 100,000 people. And, this was before the days of internet surveys. And they had to proactively fill it out and mail it back. Only 3,000 people mailed it back. She started crunching her data when only 1,800 people had mailed it back, which meant that she had about a 2% sample of what people were really experiencing. So I became curious about, in thinking about this data, is how accurate is this? And what do actual folks experience? And and what is the relationship between sexual activity and orgasm? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I soon discovered as a young woman was that masturbation was really effective in achieving orgasm. And as a very young woman, I was in a women's consciousness raising group, and I was asking everyone in the group, well, how do you get your body to go into orgasm? And I remember someone telling me, well, get under the bathtub spigot, turn up on the water just to create a nice warm stream, and place your crotch under it. And I found that to be incredibly effective, to the extent that I would never rent an apartment that didn't have a proper bathtub. So I could always manage. and the thing that was very confusing to me is I got there quite easily through the bathtub, because nobody was doing anything to me that I didn't want them to do, and I was in control of everything. And then I thought, well, I have this boyfriend, and we had just started having sex, and I wasn't having orgasms with him. And I said, well, at least watch my body do it. So I made him come in the bathroom with me and watch me under the tub, so he could see what an orgasm for me looked like. At that age, we were quite young.
You lie down under the...
Yeah, crouching under the tub, putting your legs way up and your crotch right under where the water drops down.
Oh, okay. And you just let it just drop down.
Just drop down, just monitoring the speed and the warmth. Not too hot, right temperature, and just the right speed.
Not too powerful, yeah. Wow.
So the thing that was so hard for me was to figure out how to convert this very manageable experience into partnership. The more I started thinking about women's anatomy versus men's anatomy, is for a man, he basically needs the head of the penis, the corona, to be engaged. And the equivalent for the woman is the head of the clitoris. Mm-hmm. But if a woman is engaged in intercourse, the head of her clitoris may not be getting any particular stimulation.
Yeah.
Unless she is in a particular position where she can rub her pelvis into her partner.
Yeah.
And, options would be to employ someone's fingers directly on her clitoris, or to use toys or something else to get sufficient stimulation there. And I started thinking, well, I basically grew up in a culture that didn't offer folks direct information. But there's cultures in the South Pacific where part of initiating young folks into sex is an older person shows them how their body works and shows them what's possible in terms of course, that culture's understanding of how bodies work. So this whole, and in those communities, like one of those tribes I'm discussing is Mangaya in Polynesia. And if a girl her partner does not bring her to orgasm, she lets the community know that he was not effective. And it's seen as his problem, not her problem.
And which community?
Mangaya, Mangaia in Polynesia. So, we have like such different ideas here in terms of who is responsible or where energy comes from and how to manage energy. We have had something else start happening in our society where some men believe that it's their job to bring a woman to orgasm, and there's so much pressure on the part of these men to bring the woman to orgasm that women will fake it just to get the guy to feel good for himself.
Yeah.
Like he's effective and he's a caring, skilled lover, when he may not be doing it in such a way that the woman is really getting off.
Yeah, that's why I know myself now. I believe in, monogamous, and right now I'm about 8 months celibate because I've just I love the Lord, and I just know for myself, I know my sexuality. I have a high sexuality, but I was engaging in, sexual activities before marriage and developing soul ties, and that just wasn't good for my soul or spiritual well-being or mental well-being. But I think it's important for your spouse to know your body, to explore each other's bodies. That way you're not having those conflicts where you're faking it. Because I'm at an age now, I'm 49, I ain't finna be faking it.
You should not be faking it. But if you were in a relationship where you were under pressure to fake it to make him feel like an adequate lover, there was a lot of miscommunication going.
Exactly. Like I'm not finna fake it, and I'm gonna tell them like this is how I like it. And I feel like, especially adults, mature adults, we need to be communicating this, because he shouldn't have to feel some type of way, and a woman shouldn't have to fake it.
Yeah, and one thing to consider is every day our bodies are different. So just because he did A, B, and C yesterday doesn't mean that A, B, and C are going to work today.
Exactly.
So to be present with your partner, you have to be in the moment, communicating and letting them know and sharing what works and what doesn't work. And this feels good now, but if you move it like that, it might feel a little better, or that doesn't work at all. And because we're very finely tuned beings, and we're not like machines that you just do this and that and they're there and they work.
And then, I hear some women will say, well, they want to keep their man pleased, and even if they're just tired, they're really not in the mood, they still want to, make sure their man is taken care of. They'll
Yeah,
do.
that's a really interesting issue. And we looked at that in this orgasm research we did, where we found that basically women in their middle years who were at the time in their lives where they were either trying to get into a relationship where they could have a family, or they wanted to stay in that relationship while they raised their kids, were under such pressure to make it appear like everything was right. And they turned out to be the biggest fakers, because there was and so another thing just to think about is that, there's no reason that we should be 100% orgasmic. I mean, at different times our bodies are different. And sometimes what really feels good is to cuddle, or to or to massage, or to have little ripples of energy that you exchange with each other, or to breathe together, or to lock eyes together. We don't have to always be engaging in activity that leads to one particular kind of splash.
Yeah, intimacy, just that intimacy, holding each other, enjoying each other's. But when you say, what was the percentage for the women achieving orgasms?
Achieving orgasm, this is okay, there's different kinds of achievings. But Cher Hyde's work was saying that 70% were not achieving orgasm through intercourse. And one of the things that we found in my study is that half of the folks said that it was perfectly okay to engage in erotic play with someone where you did not have orgasm, but you just had lovemaking. And another half, for a little less than half, said it could not. They were not sure about that, and only a small portion felt that it had to be 100% orgasmic all the time. And as for the numbers of folks that we surveyed, very, very few, like under 3%, were claiming that they were having orgasms through intercourse every time. You can't be a dog mom and an interview subject at the same time. Sorry.
Okay, that's family.
Hey.
You also did some teachings on sexual assault.
Yes, I did. So what led to deciding to do this was the emergence of the Me Too movement. And actually the first things that started making me see that our culture was changing and that attitudes were changing. And I ultimately did a study which I called Changing Perspectives on Sexual Assault. Because there used to be, which was just sort of standard, was this notion that boys will be boys and that guys can just do what they do, and that they're really not wrong for doing these things, and they're somehow excusable. And when I was a young woman, I was basically surrounded by rape myths, by that if a woman dressed in a certain way, or if she was out unescorted, or if she agreed to take a boat ride or a car ride with someone, that she was responsible for whatever happened to her. And and suddenly we just started seeing the upending of many of these things and the emergence of consent conversations and consent training. And so what I was trying to find out is who is responding to this, and what do people really think is, when you say no means no, what do people think that means? And we found out that many of the men who were answering this survey thought no means no, means no for now, but you could persuade it into a maybe and eventually get a yeah, which was traditional seduction. And we also found baby boomer men very much subscribed to that kind of thinking. It was only, younger folks like the millennials and the Gen Zs that saw it differently.
Wow.
And then, there was also like quite a bit of variance in terms of what people considered to be rape or assault or whatever. And there, were different definitions for it. And so really, and a fair amount of it was, gender differences and generational differences. So ultimately, if you're accused of rape, you want some baby boomer women on your jury, because they're the ones who are the most understanding of multiple perspectives, because a lot of the young women are very righteous about what they should not be subjected to. So that's a pretty interesting thing. And one of the things that I think it's led to is younger folks having a hard time finding partners and connecting, because the women are so certain that about all the things that they're not going to put up with.
So I want to go back to the because there's a lot of terms out there now. You hear polygamy,
Yeah.
polygyny,
Polyamory. You hear monogamish. You hear all kinds of stuff.
Whoa, all these terms that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had with your research, did you notice, like, with these type of multiple partner relationships, how successful are they? Like, do they?
Well, a lot of it depends on belief and context. So, for example, the folks that I was meeting in Papua New Guinea and in Africa, especially in some of the villages, they grew up not necessarily fantasizing about sharing their husbands with other women, but they knew that that's a practice. And that's something that's been going on for generations. So while it may not be an easy adjustment when another woman is invited into the family, it's expected that it'll work out. And moreover, there's certain benefits for polygamy versus divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. So if a man is bringing in a second wife, rather than leaving behind his children from his first wife, he stays in place with them and continues to parent them and continues to be an in-place father.
That is a bonus, but did you ever notice any tension among the women?
Oh, definitely. For some of the women, I was even reading in the paper about them getting into fights over the man staying too many nights in one woman's hut or house. So they were supposed to be on a rotation where he was to visit each wife, let's say one night, and then the next wife and the next wife. And if one wife tried to keep him additional nights, there was a lot of raised a lot of anger and resentment that she would try to do that. Because basically what works is when everybody cooperates, and they were cooperating ideally in raising each other's children and in keeping their husband going and keeping the family businesses going. And largely wives were married in to help with the family farm or the family fishing businesses or whatever they were. So it became more cost effective to bring in more wives and hire workers.
Was one of the women like the main person? Was she treated as like more?
Well, usually what it would be the newest one was the favorite.
Oh,
because he wanted to marry her because she was new and exciting and fresh. And so there was a strategy that I've seen in a number of cultures that practice polygamy, where and a woman who is no longer being treated like the favorite, who is the newest one, may leave the marriage and marry someone else and become his favorite.
oh, so that
So
happened.
he may have other wives, but if she comes in as new, then she becomes the favorite. So, but the issue that many women come to face is it's kind of like the Miss America syndrome. You're Miss America for a year, and then you wear the crown, and you go around and do all your Miss America activities, and then the next year somebody else becomes Miss America. So you're former Miss America. You still have so here you still have the husband, you still have the family income, you still have the identity as being part of this family. You just don't happen to be the Miss America favorite any longer.
And that woman, a woman can leave that husband and go to another husband?
She could, or she could just like make peace with all the other wives that are there, because some of them, there's 3 or 4 wives, and just be in community with those wives and all their children, and not make a big bunch, get so bent out of shape about no longer being the favorite, because anyone who's the favorite doesn't stay the favorite forever.
Right. So were those arranged marriages?
No, they're basically, well, they're arranged at the level that oftentimes a bride price is exchanged. So and there's this, a whole assessment of, well, is she young and potentially fertile? How many children might she be able to have? Is she strong and able to work hard for the family in whatever the farming or fishing businesses are? So, is she congenial? Is she somebody that we'd enjoy all getting to live our lives with? So all these assessments would be made, and then there would be some kind of exchange. And one of the things behind these exchanges, instead of an exchange of cattle, sometimes it was a exchange of pigs, just depending on the culture and what animals that they were raising. But one of the things that became difficult about these exchanges is that if the woman was no longer happy, there would be this expectation that whatever was exchanged would need to be returned if she wasn't going to stay in the marriage. And if her family had already used that up, then there would be no compensation for what was left. And so some women would feel very trapped in these marriages. And also, if they came home, their family would have no more resources for them to fund another marriage.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's interesting. And after they exchanged whatever resources they had, was it a ceremony?
Oh, yeah. There's definitely different ceremonies in different places. So certainly that's could be part of it as well.
Okay. Now
you wanted to know about polyamory too, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So polyamory is something we see much more in the Western world, and it's very much consensual and voluntary. It's not about any kind of exchange of resources, and moreover, we're amongst cultures that practice polygyny, that would be one husband with multiple wives. That's about that, those something like 83.5% of cultures that practice it with the husband with multiple wives, and only 0.5% practice it with a wife with multiple husbands. But amongst people who practice polyamory, there's many women who would have multiple partners as well. So it's much less likely to be a patriarchal style of marriage pattern.
Right. And the polyamory, usually they all each have another like main relationship or marriage, and
it depends. People do it many different ways. There's something these days called solo polyamory, where a person would basically consider that their primary relationship would be with themselves. So they might live independently, and the people that they're engaging as partners, there would be no expectation that they eventually would share a home together, and nonetheless they might have several different people that they would be relating to in that way.
So your consulting agency, the Wise Women Sex and Relationship Consulting,
yeah,
you consulted with any women within those type of relationships?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people who are either part of polyamorous relationships or considering being in one will talk to me because I know a fair amount about this. And I have no judgment in terms of this being a preferable way to live or not. I think some people are very drawn to it because they are ethical and they don't want to be cheating, and they may have multiple attractions.
Right.
And nonetheless, it's probably is not something that most folks are that comfortable practicing, and in terms of seeing their partner being with someone else. Some people might think of it as really erotic to see their partner being enjoyed by someone else, but many people are very uncomfortable with this. And so there's a whole practice that people who engage in polyamory endeavor to do, which is practicing something they call compersion, which is having a positive regard for their partner being with someone that they enjoy.
I know it's got to be hard for women, especially because we're emotional beings.
Yeah, but if they end up really liking the other woman or the other women, and they kind of create a sisterhood with them, they call these other women their metamors, who are women who are also sharing the same man. And also men who share the same women would be called metamors as well. So one of the more desirable practices amongst people who practice polyamory these days is something called kitchen table polyamory, where they would all be in community together and being able to sit at the kitchen table and enjoy a meal or enjoy tea or coffee or whatever they might with each other, and all have each other's best interests in mind, whether they're lovers with all of them or that one of their lovers is with one or more of them, so that they're all enjoying family together.
What is the main your clientele with your consulting?
It really varies. I've had a lot of young men in the arts who are sensitive and thoughtful and have a hard time finding women who they can partner with, because the women tend to be very independent and self-sufficient, and the guys don't usually get into being the sort of provider protector types, which were like more traditional kind of iconographic behaviors of men. And so some of it is helping them come to terms with who they are in terms of men and who they can be in partnership with women, So some of these guys have been my clients, and I certainly have worked with quite a few people practicing polyamory, either people who are trying to do things that don't come naturally to them, but because these days, I think, it used to be about 4% of the population was practicing polyamory, but with all the recent media coverage, with like cover stories in New York Magazine and the Wall Street Journal and such, just about everybody has heard about it now. So what that means is there's people who want to do it, but don't really have a community of folks who are also doing it. So many of them are pretty isolated. And, despite whatever book they've read, they need guidance and they need reflection and they need to kind of sort out their feelings in a really honest way. And so that's one of the things I do, is work with folks who are attempting polyamory.
Do you consult with like couples, marriage?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've had a lot of couples who are struggling with communication issues, either because one of them cheated, or because there's miscommunications about sex, or all kinds of things that couples miscommunicate about, and I help them really listen to each other.
And like, do some women come to you if they, like we talked about earlier, achieving orgasms? Do you help counsel those?
Sure. I mean, that's something that is definitely a process, and there can be very basic educational information, and then there's also just issues having to do with anxiety, and having to do with body image, and having to do with self-concept, and certainly having to do with communicating with a partner. And I don't have a big practice in this, but there's sexologists that work with surrogate partners who really offer that kind of training that we were talking about earlier, that happens in traditional societies. And these partners can give someone positive experiences in touch and communication, so that they can be more effective with their partner or their future partner.
I've heard of that, having a surrogate person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your book, how did you come to that title of your book?
Okay, that's a funny story. What happened was...
Can you remind us the title a little bit?
Oh, sure. The title is 177 Lovers and Counting. My Life as a Sex Researcher. So first, my book was just my life as a sex researcher, because that's what I was doing. I was recounting all the different challenges and opportunities I'd had, both as a young person trying to figure out sex, and then going to different and engaging people to learn and diving into what they wanted to do to see if I might like that, and all these things that might generally fall under the category of participant observation, which is the field research method of anthropology, where we engage the community we're trying to get to know, and then we step back and reflect on it and try to make sense of it and talk about it in more scientific ways. So as for the 177, what happened was I finished my teaching career in 2018 because the cell phones won, and my students were so busy texting and Snapchatting and Instagramming and TikToking in class that they just could not concentrate on a lecture anymore. And I just had it. So I just figured I needed to structure my life since I was no longer going to be a professor. So I joined a writing group. And it turned out the folks in this writing group, which was meeting during the day when I suddenly had free time, were a hair older than me and had grown up in a really different way. I came of age in Berkeley in the thick of the sexual revolution. And I, early on wanted to experiment with different partners and see what everybody else did and what else there was to do. And the folks in the group, one of them was in an arranged marriage, another one married her high school sweetheart. I mean, they just thought I was like a really unique person to them. And I knew they just kept trying to figure out, like, well, how many has she had, and how did this happen? And so one day I wrote the essay I shared in the class. I just called it 177 Lovers and Counting. And I thought that would just satisfy them because I gave them a number. And the number was somewhat accurate. When you think about if you spent many years being single, you did a fair amount of experimenting, and then I had an open relationship for a while, and I'd been at this for 50 years. If you just even think like 50 years, if you had you dated two different people each 6 months a year, you could get 100. So it's not that in a hugely unusual number for the people who came up when I did. So in any case, the leader of the group said I was being too provocative and I was disrupting the group, and she asked me to leave. But I kept the title because I loved it. I loved the number.
Wow.
And the publisher loves the number too, and they did not at all tell me to change the title.
Wow. And we can find your book you said it's an ebook?
It's an ebook, and it's a paperback, and it's a hardcover. And you can find it on Amazon. You can buy it from my publisher, who is Roman and Littlefield. And yeah, it's widely available.
Okay, good. Wow, this was great. So if you don't mind me asking, are you single right now? Are you
I'm dating a couple of people right now. I guess I'm doing some version of solo polyamory. I was drawn to one person and we thought it was going to work, but it hasn't worked all that well, and so I'm dating some other people also. See where I land.
Okay. Wow, this was good. Do you have any lasting words for anyone out there that...
Oh yeah, well, I'm 71 and very much enjoying sex in my life, and I think that if you believe you deserve touch and affection and engagement on your terms, you should seek it at every stage of life, and not think that once you reach a certain age or you've been through menopause or whatever, that it's time to stop. It's never time to stop. We all need touch. We all need engagement. We all need to feel special.
So how can we get in touch with you, Dr. Wolfe?
Well, check out my website. It's called wisewomansexandrelationshipconsulting.com.
And you also don't get deceived by the title of it. She also consults men. Also.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm the wise woman.
Right.
I don't, and the women who consult with me are not, I also consult with men. I consult with couples. I consult with polyamorous triads. Any anybody who needs some consulting, I'm available to consult.
Yes, and I will put her website in the details of this episode. And I hope y'all had an open mind for this conversation. We are mature adults. This is not for kids. And I appreciate you, Dr. Wolfe, for having a conversation with me. And you have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis.